Hey guys, you're watching Mr. H Makes and I'm Mr. H. Recently I did a little short called The Witch, and I've had a few requests on how I did it. So that is the purpose of this video. It's not in the usual structured format that I try to do, but I think it's a good run through of how you can use Unreal to do your lighting, VFX, cinematography and such. The beginning contains some character creation in CC3, so if you're only here for Unreal, please skip through to the next chapter. And if you do want me to cover anything in particular in more detail, please let me know in the comments below. So for this particular project, I actually did a bit of a customization in Blender for the character because I wanted her to have a bit of a elongated skull, which I couldn't do in the using the original CC3 sliders. So yeah, I took her into Blender and using CC3 tools, I could easily import and export the changed morphs, and I can make them into morph sliders. And I've got a tutorial on this. I'll stick it up in the top right, along with any other relevant tutorials that may have covered stuff before. But yeah, basically using the new sliders, I started to craft this kind of witch type character, and I used the standard sliders for the rest of it, elongating her arms, making her hands bigger, as well as that I use some makeup effects, added scales. She was actually supposed to be a character for the iClone Aculips lip sync competition, but I'd already submitted the maximum, so she kind of fell by the wayside. But I had quite a lot of fun creating the sets in Unreal, and they turned out all right. So yeah, as I said before, here I am. Just messing around with her teeth, making sure she's got that Colgate smile. Also made a pair of horns, and using the same CC3 tools for Blender, I imported those in eventually as accessories to sort of complete her look. It was actually an experiment for me where I just quickly wanted to test the CC3 to Blender tool, and it seemed to work right, although, you know, admittedly what I used it for was not a massive amount of morphing. It's very minimal, and also a minimal amount of accessories. But anyway, here she is in iClone. I signed a walk to her just to see what she looked like. And from there I exported her as an FBX. I didn't use LiveLink to get her into Unreal, and I have a tutorial on how you can do that linked on the top right. And giving her the max resolution for textures. So now we are in Unreal. This was a default scene, I believe, so it kind of has minimal lighting options, some atmospheric fog. So use the sun height in the sky sphere to lower it so that it became night. Then I started adjusting the post-process volume, and that's something you have to add to the scene. And I was figuring out the exposure. Usually I go for manual exposure at the end of the day, but the post-process volume kind of dictates the overall effects throughout your level, but you have to unbind it or make it apply to the whole level. So I'm just messing about with the sky sphere and tweaking lighting. Now I actually added a HDRI cube map because that gives more realistic lighting. And just messing around with the different lighting options, seeing what affects what. I'm using 4.26, it could be 4.27 in this, they're pretty similar in these cases. And now I'm starting the kit bashing process. Dumping a bunch of assets in there, which I later move around and when I compose the scenes. I was looking at having shadows on the ground, so I wanted to have an overall spotlight, which is one of the light types that you can have in Unreal. There's also obviously directional lights, which are like your main lights, rectangular lights, point lights, and these all serve different functions, but also it's up to you what kind of effect you want to achieve. And I added some headlights at the back of the scene because in my head I had this image of the witch sort of lit from behind with kind of all this swirling fog and a bit of snow happening, etc., which I eventually achieved, but it took me a little while. The actual project took me about, I think, a week to 10 days. I put a deadline on myself, so I had to get creative with cutting some corners when I ran into problems, as one does. Here I'm just changing the shaders that come through with CC3 with the FBX import and tweaking those so that they appear a bit better in Unreal. Again, I've got a tutorial on that, top right. And yeah, so here is an example of what I had in mind. I'm using a fog card in this case, which is basically a flat plane where you run this procedural kind of animation. So it's very friendly on the frame rate, because if you use like loads of Niagara or Niagara, I'm not sure, I've heard it pronounced differently. If you use those kind of effects too much, if you have a machine that's not that powerful, it could lower your frame rate quite drastically. But I quite like these fog effects, these fog cards. They're kind of stylized. Anyway, so just moving stuff around to try and compose the scene. I've already made up my mind that this is going to be one of the main camera shots. there's a sort of reverse shot which I'm sort of setting up for dressing the set. I also used a fog blueprint from this VFX pack, a weather pack, I think it's called, Infinity Weather, which you see me playing with there. That might be a particle effect, I think that is, yeah. So that has its own feeling. I had a moon from an old project that I used. I spent some time making this one. It's probably a bit overkill, this actual moon, because it changes the image based on where in the sky the rotation of the image, that is, depending on where in the sky the moon is. You could probably just slap on a flat image on a rectangle or something and it would look just as good. But yeah, I spent some time making that, so I thought I'd better use it. And I'll put tutorials, I'll put links to tutorials to make these things like the fog cards and the moon down below in the comments. So yeah, all the cloud moving stuff you see above, that is all within the engine itself. So that comes free, you don't have to do anything with that. And just figuring out the lighting here. I think the face I felt was a bit dark, so I need a bit of a key light, or a fill light rather, to make her features stand out a bit more. Wanted a rim light as well, so I'm using a point light in this case. I think that the choices here, I use a point light or a rectangle light. So I just wanted to make her image, although quite dark, to pop out a bit, so hence the overhead lighting. And of course you can dictate the radius of effect for these lights. And in this case now I am adding a car. So I've already loaded the materials, dragged and dropped them into Unreal. So now I'm making an actual material where I would put these textures and normals and stuff, and if you select them all and drop them in, they all appear like so. Then you've just got to line each one up to its correct node. So normals will go to normals, and if you mouse over the icon, or rather the image on the right, it will tell you the name and help you decide which node to put them in. So I think I got these from Sketchfab, or this particular car. And they all tend to have the same setup, so far at least. And I added another car, did the same procedure, same process, and dumped it in there. I wanted to kind of have a abandoned area where this evil witch does her thing. Desolate, cold. If I was checking whether I was going to use a point light or a rectangle light. So the point light was on the left, the rectangle light is on the right. You can see the kind of different effects you can get. So each of these lights you can alter them in different ways by their details in the bottom right. And it's how you want to mess around, fiddle about. You can mess around with intensity, color of the light. In the case of the rectangle lights, you can change the angles, the barn door angles of the light. And it pretty much follows, real life workflows, I suppose, with creating sets, and also blocking your scenes, placing actors, placing props, and lighting them. So I jumped back into iClone because I needed to just sort out the animations, get them right. Which also includes the facial animation.
Running around.
In this case, I'm in DaVinci Resolve, and I was just running the dialogue through some effects, changing the pitch and adding a bit of an echo to make it sound a bit spooky. But the original recording I put into Aculips.
What's for dinner? Head, liver, heart, or
and I didn't really. Actually, no. I did do a few tweaks to some of the lip movements, and then I saved the voice part of it, and then applied that to the moving animation.
Stop whining.
So now they kind of combine together.
That running around, I'm absolutely starving.
So after I was happy with that, I selected the character and exported her as an FBX. So whereas the first model I exported was just a static image to help me figure out my lighting and what I needed to change, this one will come in with all the animation. So I think, yeah, the animated one is the one on the right. Changing the shaders the same way I did the first one. In theory, I could have probably just copied over the shaders from the original ones folder. So now I'm selecting a camera. So this is the actual view of the camera when you record it. You can tell by that pilot active designation and the orange camera icon next to it. And if you want to jump out of it, you just press that arrow on the left. But so any moves in the view here can be recorded on keyframes. Just figuring out the final marks, and this is where I made a mistake with the animations. I had a in-place animation for the walking, and then I combined that with a route animation. So I kind of had to fudge it a bit, but I figured I would disguise that with some camera angles and cuts. This is definitely not what you should do if you're making animations for games, but in terms of making it for films and stuff, I think we have a little bit more leeway in covering up our mistakes. And if I had more time, I would also go back and redo these, but I felt pretty confident I could cheat it. And the other thing I should have done, I think, looking back, is I could have just imported the camera from iClone and have the character looking directly in the eyes of that camera. But when you do that, though, you can have less items you can tweak. So what I would probably do is parent a Cine camera onto the imported iClone camera, and then just use the normal post effects and stuff, which are not available on the iClone camera. Now I'm just animating the camera. It's good to make sure that keyframe icon is on, so it will just register whenever you make a change in the location. It will register the keys there, otherwise you have to manually stick keys down. I tend to just, if I have an idea of how the camera wants to move, I just whack it in and then alter the position of the keyframes later to match the scene. There are also other camera types available or other camera rigs, I should say. You can have a crane, dolly rig, that kind of thing, and tracks, but I tend to not bother with them as much as I probably should, I suppose. But I figure if you can have a floating camera that can go wherever you want, then why do I want to lay down tracks? Although they would probably give you a smoother, more accurate movement around a circle or something. Of course, I'm in the sequencer tab now, and that is where you have to add things that change on your movie. So the trees, etc., in the background, the mountains, they're not added to the sequencer because I'm not really changing them. But if I had a light that I wanted to switch on and off, for example, I would have to add it to this interface and then switch it on and off, keyframe the on and off state. Of course, your character needs to be in there, and your cameras, especially if you're moving them around. And in this particular case, yeah, I'm moving the camera around with the sequencer, and as I said, I'm getting my camera movements to kind of loosely give the point of view of someone who's being tracked down by this witch character. So it's kind of like a little jump, a little shock. And now, of course, I'm using the sequencer to keyframe the manual focal distance now. I prefer using manual because it gives more control. See, sometimes I can't really get the others working as well, the tracking and that may be a function of the cameras I'm using. But yeah, manual's good, and you have a lot of control over it. In fact, if you want to purposefully blur something, this is also the way to do it. You get some quite nice effects that way. And if you want to check exactly what's coming into focus, you do so using the debug plane, which is that purple thing. So here I wanted to make sure the teeth were going to be seen. And within that same Infinity Weather pack, they have options to change the snow. It's a pretty cool pack. It also has things like rain, desert scene, if I remember correctly. So there's a bunch of stuff on the marketplace. I'll link to this one as well. So here's a nice blurred effect. Yeah, the Infinity Weather pack, it speeds up development quite a lot. You can even have your characters walking through snow and stuff, and the snow displacing. Although I couldn't get it to work in the sequencer in this case, but it works great if you're making games. But I couldn't get it to work properly in this case. So that's why I went with the sort of packed ice look on the ground. So one of the things I also do is to open up a viewport, which is what the camera will see, and I will, usually it's in on another monitor, but for the case of this recording I've put it here. But I find it easier to adjust stuff from a different angle in the main editor viewport, while the camera viewport will show me, what the final result will be. Of course, all these cameras will not appear in the final video. So now I'm just changing that lighting. There's a rectangle light there. I just want it next to the character as she walks, because currently at that angle just now she actually walks through it, and you can sort of see it. And then I duplicated and flipped it and put on the other side. As in normal filmmaking, lighting is so important, and I feel it's worth taking the extra time to get everything right. Plus, with the right lighting, I can see her teeth. So you can run through what your camera sees with the slider there. Also, you can do the same in the sequencer by moving the timeline back and forth. fact, in this particular project, I think I just used the sequencer for rendering the movie. I didn't export it to DaVinci Resolve to do cuts and stuff. And here I am just fixing the eye shader, if I remember correctly. Sometimes you got to make sure this render after depth of field is checked. If you ever have problems with seeing the eyes when you're focusing, when you're changing focus. To get a cinematic look, you can change the sensor width and the sensor height, as well as the focal lengths. At the moment, you can see I've selected a particular camera by the white camera icon, and that dictates what you see in the viewport. If you select the camera cuts, you can actually choose which camera appears at what time, so you can in effect edit your own whole movie in this area, although you'd have difficulty getting transitions like fades and dissolves and that sort of thing. Now, to get a camera into the camera cut track, you click on the plus camera button and you'd select a new binding and the camera that you want to place there. Obviously this is just an example, and I'm going to get rid of that. But if the camera cut track does not exist, you'll have to add it by clicking on the green plus track icon. Anyway, you can see how I'm trying to line up the cuts. That's too far, that's about right. So you just drag along the camera cut track and there you go. Like I say, if you need me to go into further detail on any aspect of this video, just let me know in the comments below. So in this particular project, I did want to keep everything within Unreal with the editing and stuff like that, just to see how much I can do. And I'm messing around a bit with some fog cards, just to add to the scene. It was a bit too much. If it was too close to the character. Also would mess around with various cameras, and I wanted my moon in the scene, so I was just figuring out where I should put it. It's a bit difficult to see. I also added a bit of a light to shine down on the branches to sort of illuminate them a bit. And I turned down the car headlights because they were a bit bright. That's right, I wanted the fog cards to switch off in one of the scenes where she's walking with her back towards us. So I use a sequencer to switch it off and then switch it back on when I go to the next scene. So that's an example of objects or assets you need to drag into the sequencer so that you can interact with them in the final render. And just messing around with the Infinity Fog blueprint, I found that the sky was not dark enough, so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too bright, and sort of maintain that lower band of fog. So when you want to render a movie, you just click on that render icon. In this case, I was using the legacy renderer just to check out whether or not I could actually record something from the sequencer. I guess I was just being a bit paranoid, but just wanted to quickly test the renderer. In this case, in this project, I eventually just used the legacy renderer and not the new movie render queue. But anyway, I just rendered out a couple of frames. When you do that, it shows up in the top left, and it just means you've rendered something. And you can open the capture folder, and there you see the two stills, the two frames that you rendered out. So yeah, that was all good. I set about doing a bit more set dressing, and actually this rock asset, which I believe came from the Infinity Weather Pack, although I'm not sure, it actually allows you to add more snow to it, which is kind of fun. I bounced back into iClone into Character Creator to create the victim of the witch. Made him look a little bit older. I used a combination of the digital human assets and the hair builder, and also a men's suits pack by Pixtim. And then I applied animation to him. And since I was actually going to import him as a separate FBX, I wasn't too fussed about making him sync up too much to the witch, and I knew he would only be seen in any detail in one particular scene, and I could duplicate and use the same animation in an earlier scene. So I just testing his expressions and making sure he looked suitably terrified, and then I keyframed those in. And to make sure that it didn't look like he was staring at his feet and his horrible shoes, that he actually was looking up at the witch, which was actually the source of his terrified look. And that's how it ended up. I'll put a link to the final video at the end of this. Thanks very much for your time. I hope you found some of this helpful. You've been watching Mr. H Makes, and I'm Mr. H, signing off, looking forward to seeing you in the next video.